It's a pleasure to be with you. The title of this session is Environmental Public Health Practice, Part 10, Air Quality. There are no disclosures for this presentation. Objectives include discuss the status of air pollution, review basic concepts of smog and its health impacts, review natural, anthropogenic, and criteria air pollutants and their health effects, discuss acid rain, discuss temperature inversion and its association with air pollution, discuss diesel emissions, review air quality and national ambient air quality standards, discuss indoor air pollution, review basic concepts of climate change. The Natural Resources Defense Council stated, "No element of the natural world is more essential to life than air, and no environmental tasks more critical than keeping it clean." Several countries and organizations have developed air quality standards to help monitor the quality of the air we breathe. This map demonstrates the air pollution levels of major cities around the world using the World Health Organization's standard of measuring the concentration in micrograms of particulate matter with a diameter of 2.5 microns, PM2.5, or less, per cubic meter of air. PM2.5 particles are considered the most harmful particles impacting human health. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency EPA air pollution standard is 9 micrograms of PM2.5 per cubic meter. As demonstrated, many urban areas have levels far above that standard, with the highest levels seen in Mexico City, Mexico, Lima, Peru, Lagos, Nigeria, Cairo, Egypt, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, Mumbai, India, Beijing, China, and Jakarta, Indonesia. Air pollution is often described as smog, a term that derives from the combination of smoke and fog. Smog consists of ground-level ozone, a primary component of smog, and other compounds, many of which are produced by chemical reactions in the air. As diagrammed, the energy of sunlight catalyzes nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds to produce ground-level ozone in smog. Acute health impacts of smog are described as the smog complex and includes eye irritation, irritation of the respiratory tract, fatigue, chest pains, cough, shortness of breath, nausea, and headache. Other health impacts include lung and skin cancer and damage to various organs, including the nervous system and lung. Air pollution also impacts the environment through the effects of acid rain and global warming. Air pollution has caused several lethal air pollution episodes within the last 100 years. Let's briefly review 3 of those episodes. Meuse Valley, Belgium in 1930, Donora, Pennsylvania in 1948, and London, England in 1952. The Meuse Valley episode occurred in December 1930 and was attributed to a high concentration of steel industry plants, including foundries, mills, coke ovens, and smelters, that produce sulfur dioxide, sulfuric acid mist, and fluoride gas. This episode caused approximately 60 deaths over the last 2 days of the incident, a mortality rate of 10 times normal. Most of these fatalities occurred in elderly individuals who had pre-existing heart and lung conditions. The Donora, Pennsylvania episode occurred from October 27th to October 30th, 1948. Donora is a small town located in a valley along the Monongahela River, approximately 30 miles south of Pittsburgh. The episode was caused by fog combined with contaminants from iron, steel, and other metal factories that burned coal, coke ovens, and coal-fired home stoves. 14,000 residents complained of smog-related illness, including respiratory symptoms, for example, cough, sore throat, difficulty breathing, nausea, and vomiting. 400 people were hospitalized and 20 died. The most severely affected were individuals over 55 years of age and those that had underlying heart and lung conditions. The London episode occurred from December 5th to December 9th, 1952. The cause was fog coupled with smoke from the burning of fossil fuels in homes, power plants, and factories. This incident resulted in more than 3,000 deaths, above the normal mortality rate. These examples soberly demonstrate the association between acute episodes of air pollution and increased mortality rates. Without contaminants, air by weight is composed of 76% nitrogen, 23% oxygen, 1% argon, 0.03% carbon dioxide, along with water vapor, dependent on relative humidity, and lesser amounts of other gases. All air on Earth contains contaminants. The term pollution refers to the presence of air contaminants. Sources of pollution can be natural and anthropogenic, caused by man. Pollutants may be further classified as primary and secondary. Primary pollutants are those emitted directly by sources like factories or motor vehicles, etc. Secondary pollutants are those generated by atmospheric chemical processes on primary pollutants, like the reactions producing ozone from the interaction of nitrous oxides and volatile organic compounds, as previously discussed. Natural pollutants include airborne particles produced by wind, organic material from plants and animals, including pollen, mold spores, smoke, and ash from fires ignited by lightning strikes, and ash and dust from volcanic eruptions, like that from Mount St. Helens in 1980. Volcanic dust often contains silicate crystals. Inhalation of dust over time can cause pneumoconiosis, also called interstitial lung disease. Pneumoconiosis causes fibrosis of the lung, which restricts lung function and can cause death within months or years. Pneumoconiosis is commonly associated with the inhalation of asbestos fibers, silica crystals, or coal dust. Anthropogenic sources of pollution, those caused by man, can be classified as stationary and mobile. Stationary sources include energy-generating plants, industrial complexes, oil refineries, incinerators, etc. Mobile sources refer to various vehicles. The US EPA stated that half of the volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and 3/4 of nitrogen oxides in smog are caused by vehicle emissions. Even though the annual vehicle miles traveled has steadily increased from 1970 to the present and is projected to continue to 2030, VOC emissions have decreased dramatically. This decrease demonstrates the success of the Clean Air Act of 1970 that lowered not only VOC levels, but also decreased by 78% PM 2.5 and PM 10 particles, ozone, lead, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. These air quality improvements have enabled many areas of the country to meet national air quality standards attributed to the Clean Air Act emission standards for new motor vehicles. Let's consider the 7 major components of air pollution in more detail. Volatile organic compounds, VOCs, particulate matter, PM2.5 and PM10, ozone, lead, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. The last 6 pollutants, particulate matter, ozone, lead, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, are defined by the EPA criteria air pollutants, since they are present everywhere in the United States. Other scientists would add to these chemical toxicants both biologic and non-biologic, infectious agents, allergens, and chemical irritants. During this session, we will focus on the EPA's criteria air pollutants and VOCs. Volatile organic compounds, VOCs, are chemicals that contain carbon and evaporate in air. VOCs are generally the product of fuel combustion, including petroleum products and coal. Examples of other VOCs include paints, lacquers, glues, construction materials, and solvents like benzene and toluene. VOCs interact with other chemicals in the air to form smog. Health effects include irritation of the eyes, nose and throat, nosebleeds, skin rash, fatigue, difficulty breathing or dyspnea, headache, dizziness, loss of coordination, nausea, vomiting, and liver, kidney, and central nervous system damage. Some VOCs are suspected or known to cause cancer in humans. Particulate matter is classified by size. PM2.5 are particles of 2.5 micrometers or less. PM10 are particles that are 10 micrometers or less. PM2.5 particles are considered ultrafine particles. As mentioned previously, PM2.5 particles are considered the most harmful since they can be inhaled and deposited deep within the lungs. Health impacts of particle pollution include premature death in people with underlying heart or lung disease, myocardial infarction or heart attacks, irregular heartbeats or arrhythmias, and respiratory problems including asthma attacks, inflammation of the airways, coughing, and dyspnea or difficulty breathing. Even though PM2.5 particles are considered the most dangerous, several studies have shown that PM10 particles are associated with increased mortality from respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. For example, a mortality study of PM10 levels from St. Louis and eastern Tennessee demonstrated that for each 100 micrograms per cubic meter increase of PM10, mortality rates, primarily cardiovascular and respiratory, increased by 16 to 17%. These graphs show the PM2.5 air pollution levels globally and with more detail in the United States. The worst areas of the globe for PM2.5 pollution being Africa, the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, and Asia. In the United States, the worst areas of PM2.5 pollution are on the East Coast, the southern United States, and eastern parts of the Midwest, particularly the states of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. The US EPA air pollution standard is 9 micrograms of PM2.5 per cubic meter of air. Ozone is a gas composed of 3 oxygen molecules and is described as having a sharp, pungent smell. Ground level ozone is a main component of photochemical smog and is formed when sunlight catalyzes a reaction between nitrogen oxides and VOCs as diagrammed. A layer of ozone in the upper atmosphere or stratosphere, ranging from 11 to 50 kilometers in altitude, absorbs ultraviolet radiation, UVR, and prevents most of it from reaching the Earth. Solar ultraviolet radiation, UVR, is subdivided based on wavelength into UVA 315 to 400 nanometers, UVB 280 to 315 nanometers, and UVC 100 to 280 nanometers. A nanometer equals 1/1000th of a meter. UVB plays an essential role in the formation of vitamin D3 in the skin. This diagram outlines the metabolism of vitamin D in the body. Solar UVB light catalyzes the conversion of 7-dehydrocholesterol into vitamin D3, or cholecalciferol, in the skin. Vitamin D3 is then converted in the liver to calcidiol, or 25-hydroxy vitamin D, followed by conversion to calcitriol, or 125-dihydroxy vitamin D, in the kidney. This 125-dihydroxy vitamin D then helps maintain calcium and phosphate homeostasis in the body. Both UVA and UVB light can cause sunburn, premature aging of the skin, cataracts, and skin cancer, though many experts consider UVB as the most harmful for human health. For example, skin cells readily absorb UVB light, which can damage the genetic material or DNA of those cells, resulting in cellular protein building enzymes not adequately reading damaged DNA codes, which can cause cell damage, including cancer. Lower geographic latitudes, for example, southern U.S. states, have higher levels of ambient UVR and higher rates of skin cancer than higher geographic latitudes, for example, states bordering Canada. Since the mid-1970s, human activities have reduced the amount of stratospheric ozone, allowing more ultraviolet radiation to reach the Earth's surface. The main causes of ozone depletion include manufactured halocarbon refrigerants, solvents, propellants, and foam-blowing agents, for example, chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. Without that protective ozone layer, life on Earth as we know it could not exist. Concern about stratospheric ozone depletion has prompted extensive efforts to assess the impact of increased levels of UVB radiation on Earth. Much remains to be learned. Health impacts of ground-level ozone exposure include respiratory symptoms and signs, coughing, throat irritation, dyspnea or difficulty breathing, increased lung infections, worsening of underlying asthma, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis, increased hospital and emergency department visits, and premature death. Major sources of lead air pollution are ore and metal processing plants, piston engine aircraft operating on leaded aviation fuel, waste incinerator emissions, and lead-acid battery manufacturers. The highest air concentrations of lead are usually found near lead smelters. Aviation fuel emerged as the largest source of lead emissions in the U.S. once lead was phased out of automotive gasoline beginning in the 1970s. Once ingested or inhaled, lead distributes throughout the body via the blood and accumulates in bones. Lead can impact the nervous, kidney, immune, reproductive, and developmental systems and the cardiovascular system. Infants and young children are particularly sensitive to lead as a cause of behavioral problems, learning deficits, and lowered IQ. Air pollution containing lead may result in environmental contamination of soils and water and result in decreased growth and reproduction of plants and animals and neurological adverse effects in vertebrates. As a result of EPA's regulatory efforts, including the removal of lead from motor vehicle gasoline, levels of lead in the air decreased by 98% between 1980 and 2014. That decline in air lead levels was associated with a dramatic decline in median blood lead levels in the United States, as demonstrated on this graph. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless, poisonous gas produced by the burning of carbon-containing fuels. Indoor burning of fuels for cooking or heating without adequate ventilation can cause serious health consequences or death. Smokers are routinely exposed to carbon monoxide through the burning of tobacco, but the level of acute exposure is not sufficient to cause death. Carbon monoxide has a 210-fold greater affinity for binding blood hemoglobin than oxygen, forming methemoglobin that reduces the oxygen carrying capacity of blood supplies to body organs. Carbon monoxide poisoning presents with early symptoms of headache, dizziness, and nausea. Severe poisoning may cause additional cardiovascular and neurologic symptoms. Cardiovascular symptoms and signs include myocardial ischemia and infarction, cardiac arrhythmias, and may lead to cardiac arrest. Neurologic symptoms include acute stroke-like manifestations, altered mental status, confusion, syncope or fainting, and coma. Diagnosis of carbon monoxide poisoning is based on a clinical triad: history of carbon monoxide exposure, elevated methemoglobin blood levels, and symptoms and signs consistent with carbon monoxide poisoning. If symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning are suspected, individuals should leave the building or space of exposure immediately and call emergency medical services. Treatment includes high flow and occasionally hyperbaric oxygen therapy and supportive care. Methylene blue, given orally or IV, may occasionally be used as first aid. Doctors may administer methylene blue along with oxygen when treating patients with carbon monoxide poisoning. Nitrogen oxides, or NOx, refer to gases composed of a single nitrogen molecule and a varying number of oxygen molecules, commonly formed from the burning of fuels. Nitric oxide, NO, and nitrogen dioxide, NO2, are the forms most relevant to air pollution. Nitrogen dioxide, a major component of air pollution, lends a reddish-brown color to smog. It also, through the photodissociation of sunlight, produces nitric oxide and ozone. Also, in the presence of sunlight, nitrogen oxides interact with VOCs to produce ground-level ozone, as previously discussed. Though burning of fuels is a significant source of nitrogen oxide pollutants, the primary source of nitrogen environmental pollution comes from agricultural fertilizers. Acute exposures of 100 to 200 parts per million of nitrogen dioxide is rare, but can cause mild irritation of the nose and throat. Exposures of 250 to 500 parts per million can cause bronchitis and pneumonia and exacerbations of asthma. Doses above 1,000 parts per million can cause death due to asphyxiation from fluid in the lungs. Nitric oxide may be associated with autism spectrum disorders. Air pollution experts attribute urban ozone, acid rain, and the oxygen depletion of coastal waters to nitrogen oxide pollution. Sulfur dioxide, SO2, is a colorless gas with a pungent smell that is produced when sulfur contaminants in fuel, like high sulfur containing coals, are burned. High sulfur coal is defined as that having greater than 3% sulfur content. The highest coal sulfur content is generally found in coals from the eastern United States. Major sources of sulfur dioxide pollution in the U.S. come from coal-burning power plants and industrial plants that produce paper or smelt metals, for example, copper. Other sources of SO2 pollution include volcanic activity. Sulfur dioxide, in the presence of atmospheric water and oxygen, can form sulfuric acid, H2SO4, a strong acid that can play an important role in the production of acid rain. Sulfur dioxide is toxic to humans when inhaled in relatively large quantities for a period of several minutes or more. It can exacerbate asthma attacks and stimulate coughing due to excess mucus production. It was known to medieval alchemists as the volatile spirit of sulfur. Acid rain is defined as precipitation of acid compounds formed when NO2 and SO2 interact with other atmospheric components, including water, oxygen, and oxidants. NO2 reacts with water to form nitrous and nitric acids. SO2 reacts with water and oxygen to form sulfuric acid. This acidic precipitation creates abnormally high levels of acidity on Earth, damaging plants, microbes, insects, aquatic animals, fish, and contributes to the deterioration of structures, causing paint to peel, corrosion of steel structures, and weathering of stone buildings and statues. Acid rain is also capable of damaging soil composition by stripping it of calcium and magnesium, which supports plant growth. Most water has a neutral pH with values between 6.5 and 8.5, where acid rain has a pH that ranges from 4 to 5. Since the 1970s, some governments, including those in Europe and North America, have reduced the release of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide into the atmosphere through air pollution regulations. Let's spend a few minutes discussing the concept of temperature inversion and how that atmospheric phenomenon can worsen air pollution. In meteorology, a temperature inversion is defined when a layer of warmer air overlies cooler air. Normally, air temperature gradually decreases with altitude, called the adiabatic lapse rate of the ideal gas law, which is 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet of elevation. This relationship is reversed in a temperature inversion. The usual temperature gradient of the ideal gas law allows the convection of warm air rising from the Earth's surface into the upper atmosphere to carry with it ground-level pollutants. An inversion prevents this convection of pollutants from happening, trapping pollution or smog near the ground. Once the inversion cap of warm air is removed, convection of moist, trapped air near the ground can result in violent thunderstorms. Diesel engines are popular due to their greater energy efficiency and endurance. Yet diesel engines emit more toxic substances than conventional gasoline engines that have catalytic converters. A complex mixture of particles and gases, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. Examples of PAHs include benzanthracene, benzopyrene, fluoranthene, benzofluoranthene, and idenopyrene. PAHs generally have a low degree of acute toxicity for humans. After chronic exposures can result in pulmonary, gastrointestinal, renal, and dermatologic signs and symptoms. Metabolites of PAHs can be potent mutagens that have been shown to cause cancer in laboratory animals. Epidemiologic reports of PAH-exposed workers have shown an increased incidence of skin, lung, bladder, and gastrointestinal cancers. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, classifies several PAHs as probable or possible carcinogens. The US EPA also classifies several PAHs as probable carcinogens. Key risk groups for exposure to diesel emissions include occupational workers from mining, construction, heavy equipment operations, bridge and tunnel work, railroads, oil and gas, loading docks, trucking, material handling, farming, longshoring, and auto, truck, and bus maintenance. Vulnerable populations include children that ride diesel-powered buses, the elderly, and individuals with pre-existing health conditions, including heart and lung diseases. Communities located near major highways, ports, and industrial areas often face higher exposure levels due to the concentration of diesel-powered vehicles and equipment. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, suggests several potential policy targets to improve public exposure to diesel emissions, including install diesel emission retrofit devices with verified technologies, maintain, repair, rebuild, and repower engines, replace older vehicles and equipment, improve operational strategies, and use cleaner fuels, including natural gas and propane. Let's spend a few minutes discussing two air quality standards, the Air Quality Index and National Ambient Air Quality Standards. The Air Quality Index provides the public with local air quality information that includes the level of pollution and associated health effects. EPA calculates the Air Quality Index considering the levels of 5 major air pollutants: ground level ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide. This diagram shows the Air Quality Index AQI values. An AQI score of 0 to 50 is good, meaning that air pollution poses little or no risk. An AQI score of 50 to 100 means a moderate pollution risk for a small number of vulnerable people. A score of 100 to 150 means that the pollution level is unhealthy for sensitive groups. There is little risk for the public, but individuals with underlying cardiac and pulmonary diseases, older adults, and children are at risk for adverse health effects. A score between 150 and 200 is unhealthy, meaning that there is a risk for adverse health events for everyone, with a more serious risk for sensitive groups. A score between 200 and 300 is very unhealthy, which means that everyone is at risk of more serious health effects. A score between 300 to 500 is hazardous, this level would trigger a health emergency. The Clean Air Act requires EPA to set national ambient air quality standards for 6 principal pollutants called criteria pollutants that are common in outdoor air across the United States, considered harmful to public and the environment, and that come from numerous and diverse sources. As mentioned before, those 6 criteria pollutants are carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, PM10 and PM2.5, ozone, and sulfur dioxide. The statute establishes 2 types of national air quality standards, primary and secondary. Primary standards are designed to protect public health with an adequate margin for safety. Secondary standards are designed to protect public welfare from adverse effects, including those related to soils, water, crops, vegetation, man-made anthropogenic materials, animals, wildlife, weather, visibility, and climate, damage to property, transportation hazards, economic values, and personal comfort and well-being. This table lists the primary and secondary standards for those 6 criteria pollutants. Let's spend a few minutes discussing indoor air quality. Studies have shown that people living in developed countries spend more than 90% of their time indoors, at home, school, and work. When considering air quality, most people focus on the outdoor environment, yet the concentrations of many air pollutants are higher indoors and include chemicals from building materials, for example, formaldehyde, paints and solvents, combustion of fuels from fireplaces and gas cooking stoves, chemicals from cleaning agents, and cigarette smoke or secondhand smoke. Secondhand smoke causes the same diseases as direct smoking, including cardiovascular diseases, lung cancer, and respiratory diseases. For example, exacerbations of asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, sinusitis. Adverse pregnancy outcomes, for example, miscarriage, low birth weight, and possibly premature births. Specific health risks to children include sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, asthma hospitalizations, increased otitis media, sleep disordered breathing, etc. These diseases are less prevalent in individuals who are exposed through secondhand smoke due to the reduced concentration of pollutants that reach the respiratory system. According to the World Health Organization, more than 1.3 million deaths are attributed to passive smoking worldwide every year. 1/3 of the world's population burn organic material such as wood, dung, or charcoal, biomass fuels for cooking, heating, and lighting. This form of energy usage is associated with high levels of indoor air pollution and an increase in the incidence of respiratory infections, including pneumonia, tuberculosis, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, low birth weight babies, cataracts, cardiovascular events, and all-cause mortality, both in adults and children. The exposure intensity and time spent exposed is far greater in the developing world. As diagrammed, approximately 76% of all global particulate matter air pollution occurs indoors in the developing world. Women who are responsible for cooking and their infants have the greatest exposure to this particulate matter air pollution. Climate change is associated with global warming, or the increase in average global temperatures. Though there have been natural fluctuations in Earth's climate The current rise in global average temperatures is primarily caused by humans burning fossil fuels, which has dramatically increased since the Industrial Revolution, increasing greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. The four most common greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, N2O, and fluorinated gases. Along with the increased use of fossil fuels, deforestation and various agricultural and industrial practices have added to the greenhouse gas burden. Carbon dioxide, the primary greenhouse gas, has increased by about 50% from levels in antiquity. Methane sources, including oil and gas extraction processes for fossil fuels and coal mining, 35%. Emissions from landfills and wastewater, 40%. And emissions from livestock and rice cultivation, 40%. Fluorinated gases come from industrial processes, for example, aluminum production and electronics manufacturing. Greenhouse gases absorb heat radiated from the Earth that has been warmed by sunlight. This radiated heat warms the lower atmosphere, creating global warming. As demonstrated on the map, most of the world has seen temperatures increase between 0.4 degrees to 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit from 1973 to 2023. 2023 was the warmest year on record since regular temperature tracking was initiated in 1850. Climate change has had a significant impact on the environment. Deserts are expanding, heat waves, droughts, and wildfires are becoming more common. Arctic warming is causing a thawing of permafrost, retreat of glaciers, and a decline of sea ice as ocean temperatures rise and glacial and sea ice melts. Higher temperatures are also associated with more extreme weather patterns, including more intense storms. Climate-associated environmental change in mountains, coral reefs, and the Arctic is forcing the relocation and even threatening the extinction of many species. Human threats with climate change include increased flooding, extreme heat causing heat-related illness, scarcity of food and water, increase in vector-borne diseases, economic stress, human migration, and wars. The World Health Organization, WHO, calls climate change one of the biggest threats to global health in the 21st century. So what can be done? The most important global response would be to phase out the Earth's dependence on fossil fuel use by conserving energy and switching to alternate energy sources, including wind, solar, hydroelectric, and nuclear power. Carbon can be removed from the atmosphere by using carbon capture methods in farming. Industries that produce greenhouse gases can capture carbon and store it in geologic formations. Another way to remove carbon is by increasing the Earth's forest cover. Deforestation is the removal of trees from forested lands, converting them to non-forest use, for example, farms, ranches, or urban areas. About 31% of Earth's land surface is currently covered by forests. This is 1/3 less than the forest cover before the expansion of agriculture, with half of that loss occurring in the last century. Deforestation contributes to climate change by reducing the ability of trees to remove carbon dioxide from the air. Expanding forests would help reduce greenhouse gases and their effects. Under the 2015 Paris Agreement, nations collectively agreed to keep warming well under 2 degrees centigrade. However, with pledges made under the agreement, global warming would still reach about 2.7 degrees centigrade or 4.9 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade would require halving emissions by 2030 and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Another strategy is to adapt to the effects of climate change through mitigation efforts like enhancing flood control measures or developing drought-resistant crops, etc. Poorer communities and countries have the least ability to adapt and are more vulnerable to climate change. Even if efforts to minimize future warming are successful, some effects will continue for centuries. In summary, no element of the natural world is more essential to life than air. Smog consists of ground-level ozone and other compounds produced by chemical reactions in the air. All air on Earth contains contaminants. Half of the volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and 3/4 of nitrogen oxides in smog are caused by vehicle emissions. Since 1970, VOC and criteria air pollution levels have decreased by 78% due to implementation of the Clean Air Act. The stratosphere ozone layer absorbs ultraviolet radiation, UVR, and prevents most of it from reaching the Earth. Aviation fuel emerged as the largest source of lead emissions in the US once lead was phased out of automotive gasoline. Pollution regulations have reduced NO2 and SO2 atmospheric levels that impact acid rain. The Air Quality Index provides the public with local air quality information. The EPA sets national ambient air quality standards for criteria pollutants. The concentrations of many air pollutants are higher indoors than outdoors. Even if efforts to minimize future global warming are successful, some effects will continue for centuries.